It turned out that Heather is not particularly active sexually. She is not a virgin, but according to her, she has little sexual experience. She jumped at the opportunity to have a short-term, no-strings-attached relationship with a reliable, experienced man, which is exactly how her mother described me. That first night, I showed her how great it was to take things slow, and build things up to a climax. I wanted her to completely relax in my company, so we sat on the couch for a while and kissed, touching and stroking each other, while fully clothed. When she was calm, relaxed, and ready to move on to the next stage, we went to bed. As I helped her undress, I kept saying how beautiful she was. Words did not fail me. There were many to describe her. Fresh, young, soft, gentle, stunning, amazing. She stood proudly naked, her firm and ripe young breasts in perfect balance, with the roundness of her narrow hips framing her well-trimmed black bush. Then it was her turn to help me undress, picking up the idea of talking about what she was doing as she went along. I was pleased that her efforts were rewarded with a healthy and happy response from my lower body, despite my recent state of mind. It was clear that she expected to follow my lead, so I took her hand and we went to bed. Under the blanket, I hugged her tenderly, and she snuggled close to me. We lay face to face on our sides and kissed lightly, caressing each other. I flipped her over onto her back and began my downward journey, kissing and nibbling on her hardening pink buds, and then began kissing her flat tummy while running my hands over her thighs and then her privates. The attention I gave her had the desired effect, and she began to moan. She later told me that no one had given her so much time for foreplay before, and she had no idea that it could significantly improve stimulation, enhance sensations, and lead to a more powerful climax. When I finally got to her sweet spot and caressed her, she squirmed and writhed, gasping and puffing, reaching a powerful climax, her hands clutching my hair. When she came down to the ground, I moved back onto the bed and hugged her. "My God," she finally said, her face breaking into a wide smile. "How did you do this? I thought I died and went to heaven." "It's not a big secret," I said, taking her hand and raising it to my hard manhood. "Let's see what else I can teach you." She learned quickly and understood what I was doing and obeyed my desires, and soon the two of us rushed to the finish line. After that, we hugged for a while, and she said she couldn't stay with me. She lived in the same apartment with two other young women and did not want to be talked about. This suited me quite well, and I called a taxi for her while she got dressed. I offered to take her myself, but she decided that that would also be immodest. We kissed goodbye, and she said that she really enjoyed being with me and that she was looking forward to next time. That Friday, I took time off from work to go and consult with an attorney so that I would be well prepared for what might happen as a result of the actions I planned to take. As summer gradually gave way to autumn, the situation became worse and better. My relationship with Shauna has changed. Although she was still giving herself to Callum McDarrell, I was not unfriendly towards her. I did all the same household chores as before, but did not show much affection to her when we were together and avoided communicating with her family or friends. Instead, I focused on communicating with young Robbie, even if it was just the three of us. For example, if we were walking somewhere, I would happily hold hands with Robbie, but not with her. However, we still spent time together on weekends, taking Robbie on picnics in the hills or driving to the coast to buy fresh lobsters or crabs at the small fishing port. I'm sure Shauna understood why I pulled away from her, but she probably thought it was temporary. We seemed to have reached an unspoken agreement that we would not discuss anything related to her affair or the state of our marriage. I was fine with this, because I knew what I was going to do and didn't want to signal my intentions too early. Meanwhile, my love life with Heather McDarrell was getting more and more juicy. We met every Thursday when I had to stay late in Inverness. She came to the apartment and cooked dinner, and then stayed the night. She came up with a legend, telling her neighbors that every Thursday she visited her elderly aunt. Heather's sexual prowess has improved exponentially. She learned a lot and used it skillfully, bringing pleasure to both me and herself. I think Donnie also took advantage of her improved carnal knowledge and skills. As she said, it looked like he might be about to propose to her. He didn't know he was sharing her with me, but she wasn't wearing anyone's ring, so I was happy to continue having sex with her. Around mid-September, the shit hit the fan, or more accurately, the vomit hit the frying pan. One Sunday morning, while preparing breakfast, I heard the sound of someone vomiting in the toilet. After a while, a very pale Shauna appeared, clutching her robe with one hand and leaning against the doorway to the kitchen with the other. "Rob, could you do me a favor and make some weak tea?" she asked. "Without milk and sugar. I want to go and lie down." "Of course, Shauna," I replied. "No problem. By the way, what term are you in?" Her shoulders slumped and she sighed. "I don't know," she said. "Let's talk later." She turned to leave, and I put the kettle on. As far as I know, Babu Shauna spent most of that Sunday in bed. The weather was gorgeous, so Robbie and I took my car and went on a little expedition to admire the beautiful fall leaves on the trees around the area. We stopped for Sunday lunch at a lovely country inn and ended up returning home late that evening. Robbie collected some fallen leaves to show to his mother, who was sitting in the living room, dressed in sweatpants and a shapeless pullover. I made dinner while Robbie chatted with Shauna, struggling to hold his end of the conversation as he enthusiastically explained to her how tree leaves change color after summer ends. I was very proud that he remembered everything he learned from me, even that in some other countries, people call autumn autumn, because the leaves fall from the trees, covering the soil. Later that evening, after Robbie had gone to bed, Shauna and I had an adult conversation, although it sounded more like her laying out her vision for the future. She vomited for the first time earlier in the week and went to see her local doctor. They carried out an examination which confirmed that she was in the early stages of pregnancy, possibly between 6 and 8 weeks. She didn't tell Callum he was going to be a father because he had already decided to accept an offer to go to Edinburgh University and was leaving the Valley next week. "And now you expect me to just forget all this?" I asked. "You knew it was only a temporary arrangement, Rob," she said. "Now that Callum has decided to leave the Valley and go to Edinburgh, it's all over." "I don't know how you thought we could go back to the way we were," I replied. "Even without the weeks and months you spent having sex with Callum and the baby in your belly." "I ask you to forgive and forget what happened," she begged. "You are a wonderful husband and father, Rob. A child needs a loving family, and I hope you understand that." "Well, that's not entirely true," I replied. "I think that you and Callum should take responsibility for the consequences of your actions. Please don't expect me to share this burden." "But this child will not be a burden to us," she said. "It will be good for Robbie to have a little brother or sister, and another child will not add much to our expenses." "I don't think you understand," I told her. "I'm not interested in reconciling with you, and I'm not going to take on parental responsibility for your bastard." She looked stunned and then burst into tears. "How can you be so cruel?" she exclaimed, running out of the room. A few days later, while I was on the road, Shauna got serviced. The divorce filing detailed when and where her infidelity with Callum McDarrell occurred and stated that she was carrying his child. Even if she had been living in dreamland for a while, I expected Shauna to now understand that she would have to deal with the consequences of her actions. After receiving the papers, Shauna called me, upset and not understanding anything. The gist of her words was, "How can I be so cruel?" To which I replied, "Weren't you cruel to me?" I didn't go back to Lochmandy that weekend because there was no way I was going to live in the same house as Shona and give anyone reason to think the marriage wasn't irretrievably broken. The choice was difficult, but I figured that I would soon be able to visit Robbie for a few hours every weekend, even if it meant traveling back and forth from Inverness each time. The same day Shauna was served, I called Heather McDarrell and told her that Shauna and I were getting a divorce, and I was ending our friendship with benefits relationship. I enjoyed sex with Heather, but I didn't want any complications from continuing a relationship with her, especially if her boyfriend Donnie was serious about his intentions. Over the next few months, Many people tried to intervene, including Lady Fiona, who accused me of breaking the deal she was sure we had made. I pointed out that I never said I wouldn't divorce Shauna. As far as I knew, Heather offered herself unconditionally simply because she liked me. I thought it unlikely that Lady Fiona would allow information about her daughter's affair with me to be used in a divorce case. I knew from a previous conversation with a solicitor that in Scotland you can get a divorce if you have been separated and separated from your spouse for 2 years, even if your spouse does not agree. I could have gone that route, but I decided to plead adultery. And not just because I could name Callum McDarrell. I wasn't cruel just on a whim. Sure, I got some satisfaction from naming him and shaming him, but most importantly, I didn't want to end up with parental responsibility on the grounds that I was married to Sean when the baby was born. Let Callum and Shona bear that responsibility, and let the child support agency make sure that Callum pays for his child's upbringing. I needed to get a divorce as soon as possible if I wanted to avoid this trouble. Family law lawyers are no less greedy than other lawyers, but I made a generous offer to allow Shona to keep the cottage in Lochmagundy and agreed to maintain a schedule of monthly child support payments until Robbie turned 18. Both lawyers tried to stall for time and get more money out of us, so it took a few more months, but eventually Shauna admitted that it was over between us. It appears she has reached a financial agreement with Callum and his family. Her pregnancy proceeded without problems, and at the end of April, a couple of weeks after the date of our official divorce, she gave birth to a girl. I rented a small flat in Inverness full-time and went to Lochmandy every other Saturday to spend the day with Robbie. I wasn't interested in hearing about what was going on in Shauna's life, but Robbie was happy to have a little sister, and Shauna and I tried very hard to make sure he was a caring and loving big brother. I made it clear to Shauna that when I came to visit Robbie, I would not be participating in any family activities. She tried to ambush me a couple of times, but eventually gave up, and from then on, Robbie was ready for me. So I didn't have to spend any more time with Shauna and her baby than was absolutely necessary. I wasn't rude, but she soon realized that our conversation would never go beyond discussing the weather or how Robbie was doing at school. Life went on, and I began to get used to a different pattern of social activity. I had a lot more time for myself, including some amorous encounters, but I wasn't looking for a long-term relationship. Oddly enough, this seemed to work to my advantage with quite a few women, but I tried to avoid the so-called cyclists who were willing to ride with anyone who showed interest. Time passed, and a few years later, I read in the local newspaper that Callum McDarrell had become engaged to a young woman he had met while both were studying at Edinburgh University. She came from a social background, her family were from the nobility, and lived in a large old mansion on their country estate somewhere in Sussex or Surrey. The newspapers thought she was quite attractive, and the article talked about a Beauty and the Beast romance in which a wild Scottish Highlander is tamed by an aristocratic English beauty. I decided to visit her in Edinburgh before she decided to take this step. It was not difficult to track her down, and she was so curious about the purpose of my visit that she agreed to meet me in a safe environment. We met in one of those wonderful old Edinburgh pubs where you can hear the buzz of conversation all around and where it is difficult to make out what others are saying unless you are sitting close enough to them. I recognized her from a photo in the newspaper, and soon we were sitting in a small cozy booth with a couple of drinks. "What does all this mean, Mr. Johnson?" she asked, not knowing that I used a pseudonym. "Sorry for my spy passions, but I have information about Callum McDarrell that I would like to tell you," I said. "No worries. Everything is not so scary, and you can check and see for yourself what I am about to tell you." "Go on," she said. "I'm listening, but I hope this is not some kind of scam." "Not at all," I replied. "Let me ask, how well do you get along with Callum's daughter?" She looked puzzled. "What are you speaking about? Didn't he tell you about his daughter?" I asked. "No." "Well, I guess you'll meet her in due time. She lives in Lomagundy with her mother." "It's very difficult for me to believe this. Are you sure he has a daughter? He never talked about having a daughter from a previous relationship." We visited his parents in Lochmandy several times, and neither he nor they ever mentioned his daughter. Callum's daughter lives with her mother and older half-brother about half a mile from Callum's parents' house, I answered. Her name is Flora. She just turned 5 years old, and she will go to school in the fall. By all accounts, she is a lovely girl, and I am sure you will get along well with her, even if paying her expenses for the next 20 years will put a slight strain on your finances. She looked at me coldly. Do you have evidence that your words are true? I handed her a copy of the divorce decree, which mentioned Shauna's infidelity with Callum. You can easily have someone check the additional evidence, I said. It took her a while to read the basic details, but she was clearly unhappy. I can't believe he didn't tell me about this, she said. We were supposed to get married, and now you say that he has a daughter from a previous relationship with a single mother who lives practically on his doorstep. Look, I'm sorry if this is news to you, I said. This information is practically public, so I'm sure you could have found out about it without my intervention. For all I know, he was probably going to tell you about this before your wedding. Whatever you do, please don't tell him how you found out. But it's better if you find out sooner rather than later. After all, if you marry Callum, you share his obligations and responsibilities. I'll have to think about it, Mr. Johnson, she replied. But thank you for bringing it to my attention. Can I keep this? She asked, holding a copy of the divorce certificate in her hands. Of course, I answered her. With my pleasure. She stood up to leave, and I felt great satisfaction when she walked out of the busy pub. I'll never see her again. And if things turn out the way I expect, Callum McDarrell won't see her again either. About a month later, while picking up Robbie, I happened to mention to Shona that I had read in the newspaper that Callum McDarrell was getting married. Yes, he should have, she said, looking at me suspiciously. But someone told his fiancée about Flora and she canceled everything. I hope it wasn't you, Rob? I answered. Why would I do something like that? Later that year, I had another interesting conversation with a stranger in a pub. One of my colleagues heard me talk about the stunning views from Mount Hokmagandi and insisted on introducing me to his uncle, who claimed to have walked the hills in the area a lot in his youth. It turned out that this charming old man was a good friend of John McKee, the man whom Shauna called her father, and who died in that terrible car accident before Shauna was born. He was shocked to learn that I was married to Sean and asked why we got divorced. I told him the short version, that she had an affair and got pregnant by another man. Well, he said, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Rob. What do you have in mind? Did you know that John McKee was not Shauna's biological father? I asked. Yes, he nodded. And, unfortunately, so did John McKee. Otherwise, he might still be alive. I thought he died in a car accident, I replied, wondering what he meant. That's what the insurance company decided, he said, but the truth is a little different. After listening to your story, I think I can trust you not to tell anyone what I'm about to tell. John came to see me because he had just found out that his wife was having an affair. I tried to console him, but he was completely devastated. I didn't tell anyone what he told me, and his wife never found out that he found out everything. Because that day on the way home, John drove his car into a cliff. I decided not to say anything, but I keep asking myself if I could have done more to help him. But I think he just couldn't live with what she did. The old man paused briefly, no doubt remembering his friend, John McKee, and then looked me straight in the eye and added, I'm so glad you're not like poor John. I put a lot of effort into my job for a while, and ended up leading the Scottish Highlands infrastructure team at a multinational telecommunications company. This job gave me great pleasure, although at that time I was not the happiest person. Things started to get better, but I think the healing process started when I met Ursula. She's not a stupid German woman from Hamburg who divorced her husband because he had sex with his personal assistant and decided she wanted to get away from it all and live in the Scottish Highlands. She loves hill walks. Her outlook on life is very similar to my own, and she doesn't suffer fools. Honestly, I think she can be a little scary sometimes, but everyone else thinks she's pretty. We've been living together for 3 years now, but I don't know if we'll end up getting married. We're both a little cautious about how we frame our relationship, but who knows what could happen. Robbie turned 18 last month and will be coming to Inverness to go to university next year. In the meantime, he spends most of his free time having sex with Heather McDarrell at Shona's house in Lochmandy. Robbie asked to give him Heather, and she was hardly able to refuse him this request. She is a future chief, after all, and seems determined to continue the tradition of giving, no matter the consequences. I see Robbie at least once a week when he comes to visit us in Inverness. I spent a lot of time teaching him about giving over the past year. Now he knows exactly why I divorced his mother and why I want nothing to do with her or his half-sister Flora. It was not easy for him to come to terms with the behavior of his mother and her accomplices, but he did not fail to take advantage of the opportunity and had sex with Heather for most of the year. Of course, Robbie chose Heather for a reason. She got this job based on my recommendation. I don't know if she realizes that she had to choose whether to commit adultery or not because of me. On a less serious note, I find it funny that she will teach him much of what I taught her. Robbie thinks she's a slut for breaking her vows and betraying her husband. But he agrees with me that she's good fun and great sex, and he's going to make the most of it. Heather's husband, Donnie, runs a pet food supply company with a warehouse in the Inverness area. Donnie and Heather have a home in Lochmandy, but spend a lot of time traveling to see their clients and suppliers. They have been married for 10 years and have a lovely 6-year-old daughter who spends a lot of time with her grandmother, Lady Fiona. I don't think Donnie knows about the gift, and I'm not going to tell him that Robbie raped his wife. Well, at least not now. I'll wait until Robbie gets tired of her, and then we'll see what happens when Donnie finds out. Behind his warm and friendly facade lies a hard-hearted businessman. It's unlikely that Donnie is one of a series of cuckolds. I don't think he'll blame Robbie, but if I were betting, I'd bet on some serious bitch burning. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.